Welcome back to Defence Talk, Securing UK Advantage, a podcast brought to you by the Council on Geostrategy in partnership with trade association ADS Group and sponsored by industry powerhouse BAE Systems. Our podcast discusses key questions that shape defence, technological and national security agendas in the UK and explores the main themes in British defence in the context of intensifying geopolitical competition. All individuals, governments and companies face cybersecurity threats. These threats come in many different forms, from low-level threats such as website defacement to high-level threats to critical national infrastructure and military technologies. For example, in 2022, the UK was the second most ransomware-attacked country globally after the US. In recent months, Britain has fallen victim to a number of such attacks, including a recent ransomware attack last month in which Shilin, a Russian cybercriminal group, targeted NHS patient data and published it online. Also, earlier this year, in May, the Ministry of Defence was subject to an attack in which a system holding the names and bank details of armed forces personnel was hacked by a malign actor widely reported to be the Chinese state. Therefore, in this episode, we will focus on the various cyber threats facing the United Kingdom in 2024, discuss where they come from, and attempt to determine how we ought to address them. I'm Victoria Starrick-Summerlin, co-founder and director of strategy at the Council on Geostrategy, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Adrian Nish, Head of Cyber Portfolio at BAE Systems Digital Intelligence, and Alistair Lucas, Head of Cyber and Digital Engagement at ADS Group. So Adrian Nish is Head of Cyber Portfolio at BAE Systems Digital Intelligence, where he's responsible for leading the cyber portfolio team, including strategy, R&D investment, and product management. Previously, Adrian was the head of threat intelligence at BAE Systems, where he established the threat intelligence function as an offshoot of incident response and security monitoring. And we are also delighted to have with us Alistair, who is the head of cyber and digital engagement at ADS Group. He's responsible for delivering forward leadership and curating engagement opportunities for companies within the areas of cybersecurity and emerging technologies. Alistair joined ADS Group after working with the New Zealand Defence Force for over 8 years, most of which was spent in London. So Adrian and Alistair, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So let's begin this conversation by focusing on the lower level cyberspace threats. Could you give us some examples, Adrian, of what might constitute a low level cyber threat?
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. So, the internet is a fairly toxic place. I think it's worth sort of putting out there. If you were to put any machine on the internet that didn't have a basic security in place, like a firewall, for example, and it wasn't patched, it probably has a time to live measured in minutes before it's going to get compromised. And that's just really the background radiation of the internet. So scanners that are constantly probing for vulnerabilities. And many of those are just low-level threats. It's people who are doing research, people who are curious about what's out there. And some of those are more serious actors. And there's a whole kind of spectrum in between of motivations behind it. And that's really just the starting point for low level threats. There then gets into communities of juvenile groups who gang together, and hacking is kind of their hobby, and so they get a bit of a thrill out of being able to do basic things like website defacements, stealing information, and just generally causing a nuisance on the internet. And that's really, again, just the base of where it starts, and there's a whole range of other actors in that space as well.
So what are the main factors that motivate those actors?
Well, I think for the kind of juveniles, it is, it's the thrill of being able to use their skills, use their know-how to get one up on a particular victim, and then effectively the bragging rights that come from being within a community, right? So there's hacking forums that these kids get onto, and that extends into kind of private groups where they share targets, they share tools, and it's just a hobby, frankly, for these kids. Now, oftentimes they get caught. And when they get caught, because they're minors, they don't necessarily face the same sort of charges that adult criminals would. And sometimes they manage to turn it around and they make a career in cybersecurity later. They make a bit of a name for themselves. They say, oh, in my youth I did this, that, and the other, and that can be a really viable way into the industry. Of course, they were criminals at one point. They did make mistakes, and whether they truly were remorseful for that is always under question. But that's kind of where it starts, and like I said before, there's many other motivations in terms of criminals and state actors as well.
Alistair.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think when you look at the next level up, sort of going more to that sort of organised crime level as well, that's where things start getting even more serious. And the motivations behind that are often financial, but sometimes it'd be to control the narrative or control actions of certain organisations and even nation states. A famous example that comes to mind would be the Lazarus Group from North Korea, who attempted to steal $1 billion from the Bangladesh Central Bank, I think through a series of rather fortunate events, typos and malfunction equipment. They managed to only steal about $81 million, only, but much of which is still unaccounted for. So I think money is often the piece that talks, really. I think one of the major concerns in this area, though, is the attribution issue. It's so difficult to try and accurately point the finger to who is doing this, and often by the time you've got it with absolute no level of doubt, the initial outrage from the attack or from the breach has died down, and the news cycle has moved on.
So, Adrian, how do we know who's behind the attack?
So, hiding a single attack that you do is not hard on the internet. If you are I guess more of a full-time hacker, full-time professional cyber criminal, hiding yourself day in, day out when you're kind of building a whole infrastructure, building a whole criminal business behind it, building a whole operation for a nation-state actor, becomes a lot harder, because you've got to hide every day everything that you do, and any single slip-up, any single operational security mistake could potentially tie everything together that you've done, not just in that single operation, but historically as well. So that's what researchers do, is they try and find these operational security mistakes that groups make, and then they follow what we call the digital breadcrumbs. You sort of follow the track back to build up that kind of bigger picture of that campaign, that operation. And if you track the same campaign over many years, eventually they make some sort of operational security mistake that leads you back to that individual or that organization, and then once that's known and once that's associated in the community, that's it. They're kind of known and they're tracked as an entity.
Alistair, how do we know whether it's a state-aligned actor or non-state-aligned actor who's carrying cyber attack?
I think these days that's becoming incredibly difficult. These lines are so blurred. Look at some of the groups in Russia, for example, who are supposedly independent, hacker groups, but they are, if you dig deep enough, you find those connections back to the Kremlin. When it comes to those investigations, I think international cooperation is key there. We need to work with our allies and like-minded friends to make sure that we're sharing the data, and that goes for companies as well. We need to make sure that we're sharing the data on our attacks. I've heard the quote that we need to become good victims, and be able to share the right knowledge in a timely manner, both with government organisations like the National Cybersecurity Centre, but also with other companies that are facing similar threats.
So what are the usual targets for low-level cyberspace threats?
Well, like I said at the start, it can be anything that they can get a foothold on. So any system that is exposed on the internet that isn't patched, that isn't protected, is at risk of getting compromised through somebody who's scanning for vulnerabilities. And if that's just your home systems, probably not very interesting to some threat actor. But if you are a company, you've got some sort of brand associated with you, a criminal could then spin that either to ransom, extort you, just to publicly try and name and shame you. And often, sometimes, I think some of these actors, they try and kind of retrospectively come up with a rationale for why they've targeted a particular organization. In actual fact, it's just opportunistic. The kind of victims of interest to low-level criminals is pretty much everybody, I think.
Alistair, 2024 is the year of elections. all around the globe. And I guess the question that I would have, we have often talked on this podcast that this year is a year ripe for potential electoral interference. And when it comes to cyberspace threats, I think this is one of the ways how actually fair elections in the democratic world can potentially be influenced. Could you please elaborate more on these threats?
Yeah, I think as the sort of low-level cyberspace gets sort of compounded with the additional emerging technologies like AI, we're going to see these threats to our electoral systems increase massively. Imagine an AI-powered deepfake with a little bit of extra information that's come out through a basic phishing attack. It's going to be so hard to tell the difference between official information coming out and the faked information. I think that's a really terrifying thought. And as you say, a year of elections. We're going to see that play out, I think, in the UK later on, this month. Well, in a few days' time, I suppose, and then also in the US later on in November.
So, Adrian, how can we mitigate this risk?
On AI specifically, so AI is a tool, frankly, and it is yet another tool in the arsenal of people who want to do bad stuff. Is that necessarily going to make a difference? It's kind of hard to say, really, because there's a lot of existing tool sets out there that bad actors can use, and the barrier to entry is already pretty low for people doing bad things. So AI adds yet another tool, and I think it remains to be seen whether it has any impact on the elections.
What are other tools?
So tools for hacking organizations are pretty easy to come by. Some of them go under the guise of legitimate security tools, and in the sense that you need to use tools to test your security. But of course, if those tools are readily available, then you can use them maliciously to just hack into organizations. So the effort it takes to get into an enterprise network is significantly lower today than it was 10 years ago, and that's because there's more tools available that are really effective at doing that, as well as plenty of online videos help on how to use those tools, whether you're doing that for legitimate or illicit purposes.
Let's move on to the high-level cyberspace threats. And we've, of course, covered some important low-level cyberspace threats, but there are some extreme threats which bring even greater consequences. Could you please give some examples of some high-level cyber threats, Alistair?
Yeah, I think when you look at a DDoS attack, say, for example, a distributed denial of service attack, which temporarily disables or slows down a network service by overwhelming that target system. The implications of that on a major critical network, part of our infrastructure, could be massive. Thinking about in the banking system, imagine slowing down or completely halting transactions across the UK. There could be panic and civil unrest if people aren't able to access their money to get their groceries or other everyday essentials. I often think about it. When you look at an attack on a SCADA system of major CNI providers, we really take the water coming out of the tap and the light at the end of the light switch for granted. And so, what happens if one day, for an hour or for a day or even for a week, we don't have access to that? There's a real chance of some proper panic, I would say. As a bit of a quip, there was a Hollywood film last year, I don't know if I can say the name or not, that sort of looked at the societal breakdown that came out of an attack like this, and they even went so far as to show complete societal breakdown and an eventual declaration of war. Maybe I'm being a bit extreme and following Hollywood too closely, but I see that sort of thing as entirely possible and with the right circumstances.
Adrian, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the big difference really with the kind of high-level actors versus the low-level ones we were talking about earlier was the low-level actors really don't care what they compromise. They have a motivation, which is either make a bit of a name for themselves, get some attention, or just make money. Who they make money from doesn't really matter. It's money at the end of the day. The difference with high-level actors is they're targeted. So they have a particular mission, they have a particular goal in mind, and they often have time to go after that target. So they can research it, they can probe it, they can find the weaknesses, they can use different tools, techniques to get into that target. The target is the goal, right? And so they will spend time to get access to it. And that really kind of shifts the balance in terms of attackers versus defenders. Defenders have a lot of a lot of things to defend. They've got to defend all the time. If an attacker gets one foothold somewhere in the network, they're in. And once they're in, it can be very hard to get them out again. So that's really the difference between the low-level actors who kind of don't care what they compromise. They just want to make a name for themselves, make some money, versus these professional, targeted, often state actors that are at the higher end of things.
So what are the key high-level cyberspace threats that keep you awake at night?
I sleep fine, thank you. But I think what people underestimate is the volume of state actors that are actually active in this space. It's only really if you start actually looking at some of the reporting, looking at some of the agencies that are behind this, and the numbers of people that are in these agencies. You kind of get a scale thing where, although the low-level actors, the criminals, they make a lot of noise, they get a lot of attention, you'll read about them in the press often, that significant scale of high-end activity that's just going on that you rarely see, it's all mostly below the radar, is probably the concerning thing. And the motivation's hard to tell as well. I think if you go back 10 years ago, you could kind of point to particular cases where it was IP theft, right? So we knew what was going on. They're getting into those networks, they're stealing the data. We didn't like it, but we knew what it was. We knew what the motivation was. These days, you see probing, you see actors getting access to networks, often in, as I was saying, in critical infrastructure, but the motivation's not clear. They're not not destroying it, they're not taking it down, but they're getting access for something. Maybe it's preparation for something that they might want to do later. Maybe they're getting a toehold that they want to maintain access, so they could use that. Maybe it's what military planners call holding something at risk. They've got access there, and they're there, and so that affects your calculus in terms of decisions you make as well. And I think that's probably the concerning thing in the community at the moment.
So let's dive a bit deeper and try to understand better the terminology. So we have denial of service attacks, and we also have distributed denial of service attacks. What is the difference?
They're both one and the same. Distributed denial of service attack is a way to do denial of service where you're leveraging a large set of machines to take out a particular target. And that makes it harder to defend against, because you can't just kind of block a single computer that's blasting information at you. And there's various ways to make it more complex in terms of the different protocols that you might use. So it's not just about requesting a page on a website, it's more maybe targeting some other protocols within the application.
I think to add to that as well, with the interconnected world that we're becoming even more so day by day, that's only going to get harder to stop those attacks. With the fact that everything from your watch to your phone to your refrigerators can be connected and essentially has an onboard computer which could be used to help deliver these DDoS attacks. It's going to be really hard for the defenders to get it right every time, and that's the thing. Like you said before, Adrian, it's no mean feat. We have to be right every single time in defending these. But our adversaries only have to get it right once.
So what are the main consequences if we don't get this right? Is it cost of time and money? Is it an impact on reputation? Is it something as serious as you've just referred to a couple of minutes ago?
I think it's everything. All of these things cost money, and we all work to tight budgets. So that's one big concern. But then also, the reputational issue is massive. Are you going to feel safe keeping your money in a bank that constantly goes down? Possibly not. Are you going to have faith in our defensive capabilities as a nation if we hear of things going down all the time? It has major impacts, I think, across society. If we can't rely on the basic needs, the basic services and basic defence of the country, then people would be quite nervous, I think.
Are we seeing an increase in low-level cyber attacks and high-level cyber attacks?
It's hard to say. I mean, I've been doing this job nearly 15 years, and it was busy in 2010. I can tell you that. So,
why is that?
I mean, cyber attacks are not a new thing. They have been going on, for decades, and I think it's evolved from that kind of hobby space where people are doing research into more kind of organized crime, into kind of full-on kind of state activity as well, where states have realized, no, this is a legitimate part of, you know, state cyber operations, operations for intelligence gathering and military purposes as well. So you know, the hobby stuff didn't go away, the criminal stuff didn't go away. It's all kind of grown at the same time. But you know, our awareness of the threat has grown. Budgets for cybersecurity have grown. I mean, we see double-digit growth in cybersecurity as a market just in the UK. So you know, everything's kind of moving all at once. And I think it's just a question of whether, you know, organizations are kind of keeping it in balance, whether kind of nations are managing to keep it in balance, so that, you know, we're not throwing too much resources at the cyber problem. But again, we're not leaving ourselves exposed to what could potentially come in future.
So the Integrated Review Refresh, a document that actually we at the Council on Geostrategy have been following very closely, mentions the proliferation of commercial spyware, ransomware, and offensive cyber capabilities by state and non-state actors. What are the future projections? What is the trajectory that we should anticipate?
I think this sort of thing is only going to increase, you know, as more and people become, you know, aware of how to do it, and you know, the barriers to entry to become these kind of criminals actually only gets lower, you know, as the services get easier. You know, already, you know, in a recent cybersecurity breach survey, you know, they said the UK government said that 50% of businesses and 30% of charities had reported some form of cyber breach. You know, that's massive, and so I think, you know, definitely take a level-headed approach, but we do need to be concentrating on investing more in the cybersecurity of these organisations, both state and non-state organisations, because those enemies, again, state or non-state enemies, they're not going to stop. They're not going to pull back.
Are we ready for this?
I think it ultimately comes back to a judgment call on motivations of adversaries. You know, if adversaries really want to cause trouble, cause disruption in cyberspace, then they can, frankly. And it just comes down to motivation, because they're not going to be anonymous, right? We will know who's behind these attacks, and if the political will is there to respond and have retribution against the individuals or states or organizations behind it, then I think those adversaries know that as well. So are they motivated to do an attack on purpose that will cause significant disruption, knowing there could be potentially a kinetic response behind it? Possibly not. I don't know. That comes into geopolitics and the calculus of, you know, weighing up the decisions people would make around it.
So to add to this, a December 2023 report from the Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy in the Houses of Parliament declared that there's a high risk that the government will face a catastrophic ransomware attack at any moment, and that its planning will be found lacking. So how can we better protect ourselves against the threats that we are discussing now?
I always think you know, collaboration is key. You know, we need to, you know, keep the crown jewels safe, but, you know, at the same time we need to collaborate with our international partners. You know, we're not alone in this battle. Our friends in America, in Australia, in New Zealand, in France, you know, we're all under attack as well. So I think, you know, we can share some of our notes, share some of our strategies, and actually help each other against our adversaries.
What about collaboration in the country?
In the UK specifically, I think the UK is quite mature in its cyber ecosystem. In the industry is quite strong in the UK. Government is, I think, fortunate in that, you know, a lot of the technical capabilities came out of the intelligence services, and we shouldn't take that for granted in the UK. You know, some countries they don't really have much of an intelligence service. But if you want to be good at cyber, you kind of need to be good at that information space, in that information space. And the UK, I think, has a strong position in that. I think as well, diplomacy is important. We've certainly seen in the last few years the UK using cyber as a tool of diplomacy more and more. I think that will evolve into kind of broader digital diplomacy. But again, the UK is starting from a good position, and we're seeing others following using similar tools.
In the Defense Command paper launched last year, cyber skills were identified as, well, a missing piece of the puzzle. And a signal that that Defense Command paper sent was that we need to upskill people in cyber in this country. How can we do this?
I think that's a golden question, really. I think a lot of people are looking at it. Yeah, there are hundreds of programs across the UK alone that get some form of central or local government funding trying to address cyber and digital skills gaps. And I think, as Adrian said, I think we're in a good position in the UK. It's quite a mature market, but at the same time, it's an uphill battle. And I think I quite like to look at it that we need to have more of a society-wide approach. We can learn quite a lot from our friends in, say, Finland and Estonia, who actually start teaching about cyber threats and critical thinking and cyber hygiene at the kindergarten and primary school level. That comes in right at that foundation level of society, and then is continued all the way through in a really mature approach. And I think we should be starting to look at that sort of thing in the UK and allied nations as well.
Adrian.
Yeah, I think just building on that, if we can stop those kids who have that misspent youth on the wrong side of the hacking battle, and get them into programs where they can learn about computers, they can explore their curiosity, build the social networks, feel they have a safe environment to do that, and realize there's a whole career potentially ahead of them, and it's just about focus on the right things, and build your community by being a defender rather than on some kind of criminal forum. That's a really important point. I'm always amazed as well. We hire people 21 years old, and most other professions you come into something and maybe 21 years old and you're starting your career, and actually some of the people we're hiring, they've got like 10 years experience messing around with computers. They've got like 10 years of expertise on computers at really low levels already, and
being 21
and they're 21 years
right?
old, and you realize this has been their hobby for a very long time, and they're really passionate about technology, really passionate about computers. So the opportunity is really there at a young age to take people and make sure they're supported and make sure they got the right network around them.
Are there any particular initiatives that are currently taking place?
There's loads, yeah. But I think as well, having visible leaders, people who are in the industry as well, and they come in all shapes and sizes, of course, but having them there so that people can see, that's kind of who I want to be in 10, 15 years time is a really important part of it.
I think just to add to that as well, diversity is key in this. A lot of the time, the image that the average person on the street would have about a hacker is someone usually male, wearing a hoodie in a dark basement. We need to sort of change that image, give it a bit of a facelift. We need to get more females in cybersecurity. We need to get people of diverse cultural backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. I think that's really important because people come in with different perspectives on how to tackle problems, and that sort of learned experience will only help give us better solutions to these problems.
The Integrated Review Refresh that I've quoted before also stated that the UK will seek to shape rules and norms of behaviour in cyberspace. How should we interpret this sentence?
So I think this comes back to the cyber diplomacy angle as well, and it's really a two-way thing. It's shaping the technology landscape so that the values of the UK and allies are sort of encoded within the technology, as opposed to other values that could get represented. And then the other side, which is seeking those partners, those like-minded nations, and cyber being a kind of a common thing to work with them. But then that leads on to other aspects of diplomacy, which brings allies together, and really showing that there is common vision for the future there, through cyber being one of those lenses.
Is there a particular role to play for private sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, if you referred to the hacking tools thing earlier, that was the Pall Mall process, and there were several companies, BAE Systems included, that was part of that. And in the press release when this came out, it was very publicly stated how industry had been leading and engaging on that process. It was a diplomatic effort, but with industry very much in the room.
National Cyber Force was established in 2020, and it represents a step up in our offensive capability. Alistair, could you please elaborate a bit more on this?
Yeah, so the UK's offensive cyber activities, as you say, are sort of controlled and managed by the National Cyber Force, which is a collaboration of GCHQ, MI6, the MOD, and DSTL. These capabilities, as Adrian said before, are used alongside other levers, diplomatic, economic, political, and sort of traditional military kinetic levers to protect our digital and physical homeland. These days we're so reliant on a digitally connected world. So really it is imperative that we have the right tools to hand to be able to ensure that online environment is safe, secure and prosperous for everyone to use.
Last episode focused on AUKUS, a very important topic and a very timely topic. And I actually would like to try to combine both themes into one. So of course, when we think about AUKUS, we think about Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And when it comes to cyber, what role can we expect cyber to play in AUKUS Pillar 2?
It's a good question. I think there's interesting ambition there, and certainly a lot of capabilities across the three nations, which would be strengthened by working together. Quantum technologies being a good example, sort of quite close to cyber in many ways. And I think already, we're seeing kind of faster adoption of quantum technologies maybe than people were expecting in recent years. So collaboration around this, pulling what's being done in academia, being done in industry across the three nations, and getting that into applications, particularly around defence and security, I think is a real imperative.
Yeah, I think there are some really exciting opportunities to come out of AUKUS, especially Pillar 2. But as a Kiwi, I have to say, I do think that we have to remember that Five Eyes is still a very good construct, and I think a lot of the leaders of the various Five Eyes national cybersecurity equivalent organisations do still collaborate at that Five Eyes level. And when we look at AUKUS, particularly around the sort of emerging technologies area, they've already realised that the US, the UK, and Australia have amazing thought processes going on there, but actually we still need to widen that net, and so they're talking about the AUKUS Plus nations. Again, New Zealand included in that, Canada, Japan, France potentially. We have to keep that. We can't be too siloed, I think, essentially.
So how else can the government collaborate with allies and partners, in addition to what Alistair has just explained?
Well, lots of ways. I mean, if we just look at cyber, I mean, you sort of go to security, but I think I think the real opportunity is broader adoption of digital technologies and how that can help nations, not just developed nations who are already quite mature in this, but others around the world to adopt these technologies and use that as a way to accelerate their own developments, whether it be strengthening diplomacy or as an aid to productivity, helping to set up services that can be provided back into more developed nations. So I think the whole realm of using technology as a tool of diplomacy is just really starting to happen. And I think it'll be fascinating to watch how that kind of plays out over the next few years.
I guess another very timely example would be UK-Ukraine cyber program that supports the cybersecurity of the Ukrainian government and its critical national infrastructure.
Yeah, well, just the other week actually we had a round table hosted by the Estonian ambassador here in London talking about the talent mechanism, which is all about civilian cyber support to Ukraine. And that was a really fascinating discussion about, it just shows how much the UK industry is keen to help in Ukraine. The passion is there to help Ukraine finish and win this war.
Yeah, and BAE Systems is the lead on delivering the Ukraine cyber program for the FCDO, and so that's something we've been doing over I guess the past kind of year or so. But there's prior work that led into that. So yeah, it's a big part of our focus at the moment. Our specific bits of the program focus on critical national infrastructure and how we can support Ukrainian critical national infrastructure, and that's all about, back to keeping the lights on, making sure that they are supported with the basic services that are provided out of that.
We've started our conversation by focusing on low-level cyberspace threats. And another point that I would like to touch on is the following. So there's been a joint guidance for civil society issued on mitigating cyber threats, published by US agencies, together with the UK, Canada, Estonia, Japan and Finland. Could you please elaborate a bit more on that, Alistair?
Yeah, I think there's so many programs trying to address this, and those sort of joint statements are incredibly useful because it shows that sort of united front. In the UK, we have Cyber Essentials, which is done by the National Cybersecurity Centre, and that continues to have a really positive impact on raising the baseline of good cybersecurity and hygiene across organisations across multiple sectors. And the statistics are really good. 92% less likely to claim on cyber insurance if you have Cyber Essentials. I think it's really imperative that more organisations join on to those sorts of things. And I think a key area in terms of, we do all these joint statements at an international level of what people should be doing more, but I think we also need to start looking more at having some recognition and equivalencies recognised between the UK's Cyber Essentials and France's cyber hygiene and the equivalents in the US. Let's stop making people jump through so many different hoops, but actually get it so you've got one from a recognised ally, so actually it works in our country too. That kind of thing I think will make it a lot easier for people to comply with the rules. At the end of the day, if you create too many rules, people will find ways to get around them, I think.
Adrian, how can we increase that cyber hygiene and cyber literacy in our society?
Yeah, I think the multinational aspect's an interesting challenge in that. And one thing I think that can help is insurance, because a lot of the insurance providers are multinational companies, so they have an incentive to make sure that the language people are speaking, the standards, compliance is consistent across countries. It helps them to understand the risk that they're taking. It means they get less, make less payouts ultimately. So I think insurance has an interesting role in this ecosystem. It has a multinational role, and from a UK perspective, again, insurance is a big industry, right? Global insurers, a lot of them are headquartered in the UK. So there's an opportunity from a UK perspective to really kind of drive that harmonisation through the insurance industry.
Any final concluding thoughts, Alistair?
I think sort of harking back to the conversations around the election, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens there, and the imposition of AI coming into that is going to be really fascinating. AI is going to come with so many benefits to society, I think, as a whole, but it doesn't come without those risks. So we can't look at AI in isolation of cybersecurity and vice versa. Our adversaries are keen to disrupt us wherever they can. So I think we just need to keep working together and collaborating, both at the intergovernmental level, at the cross-industry level, and even at the academic level.
Yeah, I'm predicting the future in security, technology, cyberspace is always impossible, right? So I think whatever we do, we got to build agility into that. We got to be prepared to be able to change our approaches to defending and be ready to expect the unexpected, I would say.
That's a wonderful way of ending our conversation on this fascinating topic today. And thank you so much, Adrian and Alistair, for joining me. And thank you for listening to Defence Talks, Securing UK Advantage, brought to you by the Council on Geostrategy in partnership with ADS and sponsored by BAE Systems. If you would like to submit a question for our next episode, please email them to defencetalks@geostrategy.org.uk. You can also find our upcoming podcast episodes on our website. Please visit www.geostrategy.org.uk/defencetalks. Until next time.